Some of y'all are familiar with the phrase rhino Republican. There's a few, okay, some older hands going up in the world. This phrase rhino Republican, Republican in name only. It hasn't been used in a while. It really was used in President Theodore Roosevelt back in the 1800s, back when he was doing all of his trust busting and breaking up monopolies, that he was acting more like a dictator than a president, and so people thought he was a constitutional republic in name only, but really he wanted to be a monarch. He was a Republican in name only. It came back to use in the days of Bill Clinton when he was a Democrat president and criticizing the Republican members of Congress that they weren't Republican enough. They were Republican in name only. So this idea of being something in name only is very familiar with us. Matter of fact, not only is it a political reality, it's also a food reality. So how many of y'all like truffles? I saw one hand, maybe two. So truffles are a subterranean fungus, which means it's a fungus that grows under the ground. They're grown all around the world. The really expensive ones are in France and Italy. It takes a special dog that can smell the fungus under the ground to locate it. It cannot be frozen. It has a shelf life of about 10 days, which makes it really expensive, like $3,000 a pound for these special truffles. Very expensive, and so now they are marketing truffle oil so that you can use truffle oil to cook with. But read the labels, because most of what's being sold as truffle oil is just olive oil with a little chemical additive that stinks or smells like truffle, depending on your persuasion, and it's really just truffle in name only. So we're familiar about this phenomenon of things being something just in name only. Whether it's a political term, you're just a Republican in name only, or a food term, you're just a truffle in name only, but it's also a spiritual reality, isn't it? That you can be a Christian in name only. A lot of different ways we've used to describe this throughout the years, what today researchers call them nominal Christians. The word nominal means in name only. Nominal Christian. Jesus just used the word hypocrite. He said, "You hypocrites, well did Isaiah prophesy of you when he said, 'This people honors me with their lips, but their heart is far from me.'" So a nominal Christian, a Christian in name only, is someone who honors God with their lips, claims to be a follower of Jesus, says they're a follower of Jesus, but their heart in reality is far from Jesus. Now, we all know that nominal Christianity is a thing, right? And we all can probably identify people that we know that we would classify as nominal Christians. But have you ever had anybody come up to you and say, "Hello, I'm Todd, I'm a nominal Christian"? You ever heard anybody self-identify as a nominal Christian? No. Anytime you ask a nominal Christian, "Are you a Christian?" they're going to say, "Yes, I am a Christian." Not just in name only, but in reality. So how do you see this quality in ourselves about what does it mean to be just a nominal Christian? Which is why I think the story of Abijam today is so helpful for us. So if you weren't here last week, this summer we are reading through the book of Kings. In the book of Kings, this period of history between the death of Solomon and the fall of Jerusalem is about 350 years, when the kingdom that was united under Solomon, all 12 tribes, divides. The 10 northern tribes form the nation of Israel. The 2 southern tribes form the nation of Judah. And we're looking at kings from both of these nations during this period of 350 years. And we're reading them in light of 1 Corinthians 10. These things happen as an example for us. They were written down for our instruction, that we should not do what they did. That's why we're reading these, not just to learn about history. And what we're discovering is the temptations before these kings, the same temptations that we experience. And we come to Abijam, who is a case study of what it looks like to be something in name only. So 1 Kings chapter 15, Abijam is a king that lives as only king for 3 years. He's a minor character in this part of history. And after we read the text today, you're going to really ask the question, why in the world are we spending time on this guy? But hopefully by the end of the sermon, you'll figure out why it is. Let me just remind you some things. The first king of the northern kingdom of Israel was Jeroboam. And we looked at Jeroboam last week. We found out that Jeroboam was a guy who wanted God's blessings. He just didn't want to walk in God's ways. And we realize that's really true of all of us. We want God to bless us, but when God says this is the path to blessing, we're not so cool about that. So that's why we read Jeroboam last week. Remember what Jeroboam did. Jeroboam set up 2 temples in the northern kingdom, put a golden calf in each temple, and said, "This is your God, and you should worship this God." As a result of that, all the faithful Yahweh-worshiping priests of the northern kingdom fled and came down to the southern kingdom of Judah. And that'll show up here in our story in a little bit. The first king of the southern kingdom of Judah is a guy named Rehoboam. And we're not going to read Rehoboam, but I do want to reference him today because Rehoboam is Abijam's dad. Rehoboam is the first king of Judah, and for the first 3 years, he's a good king. And then it says when he becomes successful, his heart turns away from the Lord, which really would be a good thing for us to spend some time on, wouldn't it? Because that is part of our sin nature. When things are going well, we have this temptation to wander away from God, and I want to come back to God when things begin to become tense. But Rehoboam, for the last part of his life, he turns away from the Lord. And so what he does is he begins to multiply pagan worship in the land. And so I want you to read in 1 Kings 14. It's there in your bulletin. This is what Rehoboam, the first king, Abijam's dad, did in Judah. It says, Judah did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. They provoked him to jealousy with their sins that they committed, more than all that their fathers had done. For they also built for themselves high places and pillars and Asherim on every high hill, under every green tree, and there were also male cult prostitutes in the land, and they did according to all the abominations of the nations that the Lord drove out before the people of Israel. The reason I want you to see that paragraph is because when this idea that pagan worship was multiplied in the land, if we're not careful, we might look at that and say, well, what's the big deal? I mean, we're in a land that there's a Baptist church on this street and a Methodist church down there and a mosque down there and a synagogue down there and a Buddhist temple down there. What's the big deal that there's other places to worship? Well, let me remind you, Israel was supposed to be a people for God's own possession. He had taken them out of slavery in Egypt and brought them into the promised land to be his people and his people alone, to declare the excellencies of him who called them out of darkness and into his glorious light, and to only give glory to God. And when you begin to set up pagan places of worship, what you are saying is you are sharing God's glory with others. So what did Jeroboam do in the north? These golden calves. These are the God that brought you out of Egypt. Taking all of God's work that he did to liberate them from Egypt and giving credit to some other god. That's why this is so offensive to the Lord. But also the gods that we worship really are what we put our hope in, what we put our trust in. What's going to deliver us from the next problem? Who's going to provide for our daily needs? Who is it that we trust to watch over us? And so as they begin to do that with other gods in Israel, they're taking their trust away from Yahweh and putting it into other things, into other gods. But notice it talks about how they did according to all the abominations. And sorry to speak this bluntly just in Sunday morning worship, but the 2 abominations that they did in pagan worship, number 1 was the cult prostitutes. So because these pagan gods were fertility gods, they had prostitutes at church, both male and female, and you would go to the temple and you would engage with a prostitute, and this would be part of your worship. And imagine if it's okay to do it at church, then it must be okay to do it everywhere else. And so what happened is gross immorality was taking place at the temple, and that trickled down to where there was gross immorality taking place just in the country as a whole. This is what was happening at these pagan places of worship. And the other abomination is child sacrifice. And so they would sacrifice their children on the altar to these pagan gods because it would please them. So these are the abominations that are taking place at these pagan altars during this time. And Abijam grows up. His dad is furthering this. And as Abijam grows up, we're going to learn that he continues that practice. So 1 Kings chapter 15, if you want to read along with me, the same translation I'm reading, it's in your bulletin there. Now in the 18th year of King Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, Abijam began to reign over Judah. And he reigned for 3 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Maacah, the daughter of Abishalom. And he walked in all the sins that his father did before him. And his heart was not wholly true to the Lord his God, as the heart of David his father. Verse 3 is key verse there. He walked in all the sins that his father did before him, and his heart was not wholly true to the Lord his God, as the heart of David his father. Nevertheless, for David's sake, the Lord his God gave him a lamp in Jerusalem, setting up his son after him and establishing Jerusalem. because David did what was right in the eyes of the Lord and did not turn aside from anything that he commanded him all the days of his life, except in the matter of Uriah the Hittite. Now there was war between Rehoboam and Jeroboam all the days of his life. And the rest of the acts of Abijam and all that he did, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Judah? And there was war between Abijam and Jeroboam. And Abijam slept with his fathers, and they buried him in the city of David. And Asa his son reigned in his place. So again, it seems like a really straightforward account of a king, kind of just a 3-year king, thinking what's really of emphasis here. I call your attention to the description of his reign. He walked in all the sins that his father did, and his heart was not wholly true to the Lord his God. Or your translation may say, not fully devoted, or he wasn't wholeheartedly devoted to the Lord his God. So that was the problem with Abijah. His heart was not fully devoted to the Lord. But notice in verse 7, it says there was war between Abijam and Jeroboam, and it also says we can learn more about his life in the book of the Chronicles. So in the Old Testament, there's 2 books that describe this period of the kings. There's the book of Kings, which is kind of we're following the book of Kings, but the book of Chronicles also gives us parallel history. And sometimes the book of Chronicles tells the same story from a different perspective or adds a different story or something else, and so sometimes it's good to read Chronicles as well. So if we look at 2 Chronicles chapter 13, we read about what the Chronicles has to say about the king Abijam. And what you notice there is, first of all, is his name is spelled differently. It's Abijah instead of Abijam, but it's the same king that they're talking about. And in 2 Chronicles 13, it gives us one of these vignettes of Abijam's life. He is at war with Jeroboam, king of the northern kingdom. They've lined up in the battlefield. Their troops are squaring off. And before they go into battle, King Abijam is going to stand up and he's going to give a speech. So what you're about to read is the speech that he gives on the battlefield as he's facing off with King Jeroboam in the north. And it's a great speech. Look at this, 2 Chronicles 13, verse 8. And now you think to withstand the kingdom of the Lord in the hand of the sons of David, because you are a great multitude and have with you the golden calves that Jeroboam made you for gods. Have you not driven out the priests of the Lord, the sons of Aaron and the Levites, and made priests for yourselves like the peoples of other lands? Whoever comes from an ordination with a young bull or 7 rams becomes a priest of what are no gods. But as for us, the Lord is our God. We've not forsaken him. We have priests ministering to the Lord who are sons of Aaron and Levites for their service. They offer to the Lord every morning and every evening burnt offerings and incense of sweet spices. Set out the showbread on the table of pure gold. Care for the golden lampstand that its lamps may burn every evening. We have kept charge of the Lord our God, but you have forsaken him. Behold, God is with us at our head, his priests with their battle trumpets to sound the call to battle against you. O sons of Israel, do not fight against the Lord, the God of your fathers, for you cannot succeed. Isn't that a great speech? Isn't that what you want the leaders of your army to be given that speech? We are the armies of God. God is on our side. You pagans have forsaken the Lord. We're faithful to the Lord. We have the one true temple, and we have the altar that's there, and the showbread that's there, and the incense that is there. We're doing everything right. You're doing everything wrong. God is on our side. You can't win. Isn't that a great speech? And if all you had was Chronicles, we might think that King Abijah was a godly king who led Israel to be faithful in their worship of the Lord. But because of 1 Kings, what we also know is his heart was not wholly given to the Lord, and he walked in the sins of his father. So a lot of people look at these 2 accounts of Abijam's life and wonder, why are they so different? I don't think that they're too different. I think they are the same picture of the same God. Same guy. He is what we would call today a nominal Christian. He is a Christian in name only, but his heart really is not fully devoted to the Lord. Let me show you what I'm talking about. Nominal Christianity, looking at the life of Abijam, nominal Christianity tends to show up in moments of crisis. When a crisis comes and you really need a God to deliver you and to rescue you and to save you, that's when nominal Christianity shows up and says, oh, we should turn to the Lord. And here's Abijam in this great moment of crisis in his life. He's in war, and he really wants God to rescue him, so his nominal Christianity comes to the forefront, and he pretends to be this Yahweh worshiper. We saw this reality play out in our own country not so many years ago. September of 2001, when the Twin Towers fell. Do y'all remember the huge spike in church attendance right after the Twin Towers fell, after 9/11? Church attendance went up as much as 25% in America right after, immediately after 9/11. The Barna Research Group, though, has done a research project looking at the faith of America before and after 9/11. And what they realize is that they use 11 determiners of faith, 11 things that you can measure to measure how active someone's faith is. Church attendance, how often do you pray, how often do you read the Bible, how often do you volunteer at church, do you attend a small group, those kinds of things. And they said on every one of those 11 measurements, pre and post 9/11 is exactly the same. In other words, there was a crisis, there was a spike in religion, crisis went away, religion goes away, and everything goes back to its pre-9/11 level. In fact, they say the percentage of adults who were born again before 9/11 and after 9/11 are statistically the same. Crisis comes, everyone gets religious. After all, there's no atheist in foxholes, right? And then when the crisis goes away, the religiosity comes back down to where it really is. Your heart returns to where it really is all along. And you see this in nominal Christians. Their Christianity shows up when there's a crisis, but when there's no longer a crisis, their faith dissipates and they're back down to where their heart really is. Another thing about nominal Christianity that we see in Abijam is nominal Christianity tends to show up when other people are watching. Nominal Christianity tends to show up when other people are watching. So here's King Abijam. He's only king for 3 years. This is the only event of his life that gets recorded. He's on the stage for the only time of his life, and so he's really going to come off looking like he's a really great Yahweh man, and he's all in for Yahweh. And he makes this great speech because everyone else is watching. And this is what Jesus said about the hypocrites. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees! You are like whitewashed tombs, which outwardly appear beautiful, but within are full of dead people's bones and all uncleanness. You outwardly appear righteous to others, but within you are full of hypocrisy and lawlessness. Nominal Christianity wants to appear religious on the outside, but inside they're really not. Their heart is far from the Lord. When I was a freshman at Baylor in the mid-'80s, of course this was a different time, but I was in the dorm that had one of the major cafeterias in the dorm. And so this was back in the days when you dressed up to go to church, so we would get up on Sunday morning and dress up and go to church, and after church come back to the cafeteria, and you had to get the cafeteria on time because they closed it at like 1 or whatever on a Sunday, so you didn't have time to change clothes. So you went to church, came back to the cafeteria, and got in line at 8. There were lots of people in that dorm that would sleep in on Sunday morning, wake up about 11:30, dress up. Some of you are shaking your heads, you've been there. Dress up and go to the cafeteria and get in line because they wanted everyone else to say, oh, they just got back from church. I know that's a different day, but that's what that nominal Christianity is. You want the appearance. You want other people to think, oh, you are such a religious person. But the reality of the inside, your heart is not there at all. I know this is changing. Matter of fact, there's in surveys today, there's the rise of the nuns. You've probably heard about this, not N-U-N, Catholic nuns, but N-O-N-E-S, religious nuns. So on surveys, when they ask you to identify, are you a Christian, are you a Muslim, are you a Buddhist, or whatever, there's this other category, none of the above. More and more people are checking the none of the above box because there's no longer this sense that they just want to be identified as a Christian. They no longer care about that, so they're willing to say none. But a lot of times nominal Christianity shows up when others are watching because they want to be seen to be more religious. And I think this is what's going on in Abijam's life. Nominal Christianity also uses religion as a means to an end. Uses religion as a means to an end. In other words, religion is a tool to get what you really want in life. And what you really want in life really is your God. So religion just becomes a means to try to worship your God. So, I have crazy thoughts like this. If Abijam really is walking in the ways of his father, and his heart was not wholly true to the Lord, then why, when he gets to a battlefield, does he pull out the Yahweh card? He's lined up in battle against the golden calf army. Why doesn't he bring out his Baal God card and we're a better Baal worshiper than you are, and we're going to fight you and beat you. Why does he pull out his Yahweh card? Well, and I don't know if I have a good answer for that. I don't know if it's because he thought that Yahweh gave him the best chance to win, or if that's because that was the best chance he had to stir up the troops. I mean, political speeches today, don't all politicians end their speech with God bless America? Because it just doesn't sound as good to say, may secular humanism bless America. That just doesn't roll off the tongue at the end of a speech. You got to use the God card to kind of round up the troops and get them moving. And so maybe that's why he appeals, but really it's a means to an end. Nominal Christianity uses religion as a means to an end. Genuine people whose heart is fully devoted to the Lord is the end. The religion is a means to have a relationship with God, not a means to get God to do something for you. God himself is the end. Nominal Christianity uses religion as a means to an end. Nominal Christianity also mixes a little bit of Jesus in with everything else. Nominal, it's kind of like a cupcake. Nominal Christianity just sprinkles a little Jesus on top and think that kind of covers everything else up. I mean, in a sense, Abijam is right. They do have the priests, and they do have the temple, and they are doing everything they're supposed to be doing. They're doing the burnt offerings. They're doing the incense. They're doing the table of showbread. They got the lamps burning. All of that is right, so he's right about that. But they also have all of these other pagan altars that they're worshiping, all these other false gods as well. Nominal Christianity has this idea that I can do the Jesus thing and I can do the other things, but I'm still a Christian. So if you have conversations with nominal Christians, if you dig a little bit deeper, you'll find that they also believe a little bit in karma and maybe reincarnation. Or they dig a little bit, they really kind of believe in a works righteousness. Ask them why are they going to heaven? They'll say, well, I don't think I've done anything bad enough to go to hell. That's not Jesus. Jesus would go to heaven because of the cross and what happened on the cross for us. So nominal Christians, they just want to sprinkle a little bit of Jesus on top of their life to make it all look better. Which is why the question is, with King Abijam, is where does his heart really lie? That's why the writer of Kings just summarized it, says his heart was not wholly true to the Lord his God. Remember several weeks ago we were talking about the cross-shaped family, and we talked about how marriage reflects the cross, and marriage is supposed to be a reflection to the world of the relationship between Christ and the church and what it looks like to love each other the way Christ loves the church. And that marriage covenant helps us to understand a lot about our relationship with Christ as well. Because you know what it's like if you're married to someone and you have their whole heart. Their heart is completely yours. And unfortunately, you may know what it's like to be with somebody and you don't have their whole heart. Their whole heart is not devoted completely to you. And while I may not be able to explain that or define that or enumerate it, we know in the essence of what that means. I have my wife's whole heart. I just have part of her heart. I have a slim part of her heart. There's a difference. That's why all dating relationships are destined for this conversation. In the 80s in Baylor, we called it DTR. I don't know what y'all call it now. But you've got to define the relationship, right? And that's the essence of what you're asking. Are our hearts going to be devoted exclusively to each other? Or are we going to be sprinkling Jesus on top of a lot of different things? And that's what's happening here. Is our heart completely devoted to the Lord? Because nominal Christianity really puts their hope, their real God is determined really by these key words, by hope, trust, joy, and deliverance. Hope, trust, joy, and deliverance. What do you hope in to find joy tomorrow? That's your God. What do you trust to deliver you when a crisis comes? That's your God. What do you delight in? What do you find most beautiful in the world? That's your God. Right? What brings you joy? That's your God. And when nominal Christianity, ultimately always their heart goes back down to what they really hope in, really trust in, really delight in. That's why Abijam always goes back to his pagan gods. That's really where his heart was. So where is your heart today? As I read the story of King Abijam, just to come back to the same idea, nominal Christianity is so easy to identify in someone else's life. It's just so hard to see it in our own life. Again, I've never met anybody who's introduced themselves and said, yes, I'm a nominal Christian. Yes, I'm pretending to be a Christian, but I'm really not. To be honest with you, I've never done a funeral for anyone, church member, non-church member, and never heard any family member say, I'm pretty sure the deceased person is in hell. Never. And I can tell you some stories. I've done some funerals of, anyway, chase that rabbit. But never. Everyone identifies and thinks of themselves as a believer who's in a right relationship with God and who's going to heaven when they die. And Jesus said, not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven. That there is this reality of those who identify, but there really are Christians in name only. And maybe Abijam helps us to see the distinction of that. Is your faith something that just shows up in moments of crisis? Is your faith just something that is for you, it's an image, it's so people think that you're more righteous than you are? Is your faith just something that you kind of sprinkle on top, but it's not really a driving reality in your life and everything that you do? Is your faith just something really that you're using to get what you really want? Is Christ really what you trust in, what you hope in, what you delight in? Maybe those questions can help convict us about this as well. Well, would you pray with me?